Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the fourth event of our DRCLAS Film Series, Are We There Yet? A film series on queer futures. We will discuss the film Dance of the 41 by David Pablos. David, it's an honor to have you here tonight. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. My name is Marcela Ramos. I'm the program manager for the Art, Film and Culture program at the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University, DRCLAS. The discussion tonight will be moderated by Adri, Rodríguez, Ríos, and Laura Pérez Muñoz. They're both doctoral students from the Department of Literature and Romance Languages at Harvard. And moderators tonight for this event and curators of the whole series as well. So I'll let them introduce our speaker and tell us more about the series and how this programming support their academic research. But I'll just go over some housekeeping information before we start. So we are recording, you see that. We will be available, all the series and this event in particular will be available on our YouTube channel. Shortly after the session, we'll email you a link with that information and I'll put on the chat all the information about our social media channels. We're adding the bios and the links on the chat and all the information also about all the rest of our events at DRCLAS. And finally, you'll see at the bottom a Q&A button. You can use that for your questions whenever during the session, and Laura and Adri will be looking at those and including them in the Q&A at the end. So thank you, Laura, Adri, welcome.
Muchas gracias, Marcela. Thank you very much, Marcela, DRCLAS, Laura, David, and everyone present here today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our film series today. And so this project came into existence while Laura and I were working on our general exams as PhD students. And we brainstormed together, and there were many points in our research that our interest convened, and realized that many points of literature and research were related to visual narratives and films. And in order to delve into them, we wanted to create a series where we could talk with the director and dialogue with a broader audience on what they thought about the film, the context, and how it came to be. Are We There Yet? A film series on queer futures is a curatorial exercise to interrogate queer philosopher Jose Esteban Muñoz Cruising Utopia's book, where initiating and foundational sentence says, "Queerness is not here yet." And that specific sentence accompanied Laura and myself throughout our writing process. So Are We There Yet serves as a catalyst for an intersectional dialogue with the people who orchestrate the narratives of the films we have selected. The goal of the series is to ignite a conversation that hinge our diverse border experiences while always looking out for the queer. So thank you everyone for joining this conversation. This is the last film of our film series. So I'm very happy that each one of you are here accompanying us today. Laura, you want to take on the floor with the, yeah.
Yes. A few questions have come up in the Q&A. This film was available on Netflix, both in the US and in Latin America. And so David Pablos here with us today. Thank you, David, for your time. Is a Mexican director, editor, and screenwriter, an active filmmaker since 2007, and has been involved in 6 feature films, including shorts and documentaries. Pablos attained recognition for directing La Vida Después in 2013 and Las Elegidas in 2015. Pablos has worked with non-professional actors on his narrative films, for which he has received awards at several international film festivals, including the Morelia International Film Festival and Cannes Film Festival. Pablos also received an Ariel Award for Best Short Fiction Film in 2010, La Canción de los Niños Muertos, and in 2016 won for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay at the 58th Ariel Awards in Mexico for his work in the film Las Elegidas. And please, we invite you that after this event, you search for his other films that are very beautiful. And to continue this conversation outside of the academy. Yeah. Again, thank you everyone for being here. So I think we wanted to start this questions with speaking a bit about the archives and your relationship to them as you thought about this film. Because I think that Adri and I also, while we research, we noticed that when it comes to queer narratives, queer films, visual textual media, if it's not contemporary material, it's much harder to access. We find that a lot of archives have been destroyed, and our research then has to be modified into speaking to like interviews, word of mouth, sort of like chismes, and critical fabulations. So yeah, so our first questions would be, how did you come about this film project? And since its conception, when did you hear about this historical event, and how did you transform it into a film?
So, I mean, well, first of all, thank you for this conversation. It's a pleasure to meet you both. The Dance of the 41 is a very well-known event in Mexico. You know, there is basically there are no archives. There is no official information on this event. The only things that we have is what certain diaries back in the day in 1901 wrote. But these diaries were not the most important or sophisticated diaries, to say it in a way. You know, these were not part of the official regime diaries. So the amount of information is very small. And like what you said, most of what we know is most of all from what happened from mouth to mouth, but also certain historians or certain writers wrote about this event a few years later, changing the names of the participants that, you know, of the Dance of the 41. There is very little information known. And actually, I was talking to a historian who was, this person was our guide for the project. And what he said is that, you know, basically, if we want to take all the official information, there is no actual way of proving that this dance actually happened. We do have what the diaries said, but these were not the diaries, like I said before, that were the most respected diaries. There is a book that was written a few years later about the Dance of the 41. There is a novel. I think it was written 8 or 7 years later after the event. And it's interesting because it was written by a man, heterosexual man, and his take on this event is very condemnatory. He basically makes fun of the characters, and he basically portrays them, in a sinful way. So by the end of this novel, the two main characters, one of them, is converted and becomes heterosexual. So I mean, it is a terrible novel that basically judges this event and judges the characters that took place in it. Now, the main reason for which we know about this event is because the son-in-law of the president was supposedly an attendant at this party. And this is why we know actually about this event. And basically is why we have the amount of information is because, this is a contradiction. This is the guy who they tried to hide back then. They tried to erase his name from history. And we know, if we know one name, it's this guy's name, who was Ignacio Latorre y Mier. And this character for me is very interesting because, you know, he was one of the richest men in Mexico back then. He married the daughter of the oldest daughter of Porfirio Diaz, the president. And like it was back in the day, this was basically a transaction. This was an agreement between the president and between this man, because Ignacio wanted to be, basically he saw himself, I believe he saw himself as the future president. He had all that it took to be in this position. And for Porfirio Diaz, it was a perfect marriage for his oldest daughter, who was born out of matrimony and who was also the daughter of an indigenous woman that, you know, back then was, and still is today, present day Mexico, racism is very present. So the fact that this woman was the daughter, was born out of marriage, was the daughter of an indigenous woman, she became in a way isolated from this high society that she was supposed to belong to. So, I mean, it was a perfect agreement between Ignacio and the president, but it all fell apart because of this scandal. And Ignacio, his story is very interesting because after the dance of the 41, basically he's buried alive and he is erased from society. There is, I will just mention this very briefly. There is, he had an important, let's say, participation in the Mexican Revolution. And there is a supposed romance between him and Zapata, Ignacio Zapata, who is a very important hero, revolutionary. But that is another story. But so the two main reasons for which we know about so much or so little, but at the same time, this story is still with us today in Mexico, is because of the attendant of Ignacio Latorre, who was a son-in-law of the president. And because this is the first time that homosexuality is discussed in the media in Mexico at the time. This is like a Mexican writer, Carlos Monsiváis. He basically said that the Dance of the 41 is like the coming out of the gay community in Mexico in 1901. So these two reasons are the reasons for which this story prevails to the present day. And it's because back then it was the scandal of the century, basically. Oh wait, but I realized that I didn't answer your question of how we came up of making this into a film. So, I mean, this story for me is fascinating for what it is, for what it represents, for who the characters are also, and for what it has to say, you know, how it still portrays a part of Mexico, of present day Mexico. Some things haven't changed so much. For me, this was quite a revelation when I was investigating more about this story. But I immediately knew that I wanted to tell this story. I mean, I heard about this when I was a child. This is not an official story. They don't tell this story in school. This is more of, you know, mouth to mouth, and in the gay community, this is very well-known event. But I found this story when I was a child. It always stayed with me. And then one day, talking to a friend, she was investigating, she was doing a documentary on Porfirio Diaz. This story came up, we talked, and we decided to make the film. It was, you know, it was a leap of faith because it's not easy to make period films in Mexico. And it's even more difficult to make a gay film, period film in Mexico. I don't think, actually, I think a Mexican film critic said recently that it was the first gay period film in Mexico. So we knew it was going to be hard to finance this film because of what it took, of what it meant, because of the amount of, it was not going to be an easy film to shoot, to finance. But we decided to do it, you know, we committed to this story. And it was, I've always said this when we premiered the film here in Mexico, it was very hard to finance at first. we wouldn't find people who wanted to invest in this film. In Mexico, we have a very specific way of financing films, you know, through companies that they give money for film and it's tax deductible. So it was very difficult to convince companies to give us money for this specific film. They basically were a little bit scared of the subject. And, you know, the ones that said, well, maybe we can help you out, they didn't want the film to be, they explicitly asked me, but it's not going to be very explicit. It's not going to be, there's not going to be nudity. There's not going to be this and that. And of course I said no, which was a lie. You know, back then I didn't care. We had to finance this and then we will, but I've always said our biggest partner was Netflix. They are the ones that basically put 60% of the funding, but also once we had achieved a small amount through Mexican funding. So, I mean, we shot the film in 2019. It was right before the pandemic. I also think that we finished it like 2 months after everything changed. And I think it would have been impossible to shoot it at least until now here in Mexico under these circumstances.
Thank you, David. Thank you for such a wonderful answer. And just to follow up with your commentary on the difficult task of creating a film with such a narrow and scarce archive and known histories, we wanted to ask you about so how do you approach those archives themselves? How did you fill in the silences that you didn't know about the story?
Yeah.
Did you rely on interviews? How was your creative license in a way inspired by that, and how your imagination or the team of work that you had with imagined the work itself, like to create this film?
I mean, this is a very good question because it was one of the first creative decisions that we have to make when writing the screenplay. We knew very early on that we had to fill many gaps. I mean, we read as much as we could. We read about history. We read about these characters, and there are a few books that tell Ignacio's life and Amada's life. There is we have a Mexican historian who is descendant of this president, Porfirio Diaz, and he's basically dedicated all his life to the Diaz family. And he wrote a very interesting book called The Exile, which is about the Diaz family once they left Mexico after the revolution. And he, in this book, talks a lot about Ignacio and Amada. And I don't think there's another book that goes so much in depth about them. And, you know, there are some things that we don't know about these characters that reveal a lot of who they are. I mean, we do know that right after Ignacio got married, he got this position in Congress. We do know that Ignacio was one of the richest men. We don't know that Ignacio, I mean, he liked power. He basically inundated a river and changed the course of the river so that it would go next to his land, you know. It was this kind of person. And one of the first decisions also that we made when we said we want to portray these characters, especially with Ignacio, is we don't want to make Ignacio, what's the word? We don't want to idealize Ignacio. Ignacio was who he was, and he made many things that, you know, can be judged in many ways, you know, in his personal and political life. So we don't want to make things black or white. We don't want to make him a hero. You know, this is a man of his time and his social class, and also the time where he was born. And he had to fulfill this way of life. He had to fulfill all these expectations that were put upon him. I mean, back then, everyone had to get married. There was no other way. Men, women, And so yes, he cheated on his wife. He was a white rich man. He was very, very privileged, and he lived this privilege. And also the group of the 41, or the ones who we assume were part of this group of the 41, had to be also, wealthy men of high society, mostly white, because this is a reality of Mexico. And most of them, we said, well, they travel, this specific period of Mexico, there was a big influence from France. So, they said that Mexico in the early 20th century, late 19th century, it was like Paris, like Latin American Paris. So, we said these men travel, these men are men of the world, they have these clubs, so they have power, they can be free in this circle. And I read a lot about, these societies of gay men in Europe. There are some books that talk about certain codes from the era, from the 19th century, how men, they had like certain codes to know the other one was gay. They used pockets a certain color, things, very small things like that would give them hints about, can they start flirting with another man. So there was this fascinating way of communicating that we discovered, that we rehearsed, and upon that we started writing who these characters might be. And I think that the biggest license that we took on the screenplay was with the character of Amada. I mean, we do know she was a daughter of I don't know how you say this in English, soldadera, who is like it's the women that in war follow soldiers and basically assist them, and they also carry guns. And Amada was the daughter of a soldadera, and we do have some hints of how she lived, but basically we decided, to take the most risks with this character on how we want to portray her, and we decided to. This woman is going to be what's the word? This woman is going to be in a certain way the antagonist. We didn't want to make white or black characters on how they behave morally, but then she's not going to be in this position of being submissive and not questioning the husband. So we knew we wanted to have them constantly in fight with each other. So yeah, I mean, we took all the information we had from the era, Mexico and Europe, and we started drawing from there and from the little things we do know about these characters that are facts.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect segue into our next question, which has a lot to do with Amada. So we noticed that throughout the film, there are a lot of conversations and tensions regarding the fact that Amada is indigenous. And there were a lot of key moments of where this tension came about with her stepmother and half-sister. Nevertheless, like, there's no talk about her race in the marriage itself, but there is a lot of violence. And we wanted to ask you if you, now that you say that you took creative license in that relationship, do you think that Ignacio treated her so brutally because she was an indigenous woman? Would he have treated her any better if she were the prototipo blanco, mujer blanca? And also, what was the purpose of including those scenes in the movie of violence? Because at the end of the day, it is, even if they were married and Amada wasn't exactly submissive, she had a lot of power and she knew how to use it, not only by being the daughter of the president, but by como que herself. Because as she says in the dialogue, como que I grew up in a battlefield. And so at the end of the day, it is a white privileged man inflicting psychological and physical violence upon an indigenous woman. And so our two questions are, do you think he would have treated her differently if she were white? And what was the purpose or the importance of including those scenes in the film as well?
But you know, you mean the scenes of violence within the marriage?
Sí.
Okay. So the first one, I mean, this is a very good question. And I did talk with my actors about this. And I believe, yes, I do believe it made a difference. I mean, this was a white man, you know, from Spanish descent. He was one of the richest men. He could have married anyone that he wanted. And obviously, because of political reasons, he chose Amada. And, you know, not only Amada was the daughter of an indigenous woman, but also Porfirio Diaz. He came from Oaxaca. He also was you know, he had Indian blood as well. So in a way, Porfirio Diaz was also like a little bit of an outsider from this elite. He wasn't this refined man as well. So I do think, and I talked to Alfonso, who is the actor who plays Ignacio, we do talk a lot about this. How, yes, of course, Ignacio believes like he's above them, even above the president. And this is something that there are two very interesting stories about Ignacio. One of them is that they described him like a prince, you know, he behaved like a prince and he pretended to be like that. And then there's also a story about in his mansion, he invites his friends to his mansion and they go through his closet and it's, you know, filled with lots and lots of clothes. And he says to his friends, this is my library, talking about his clothes. So, yeah. So, I mean, this is very clear who this character was. And yes, definitely. I do think this was very important for him, who this woman was, but also who the whole Diaz family was. And the scenes of violence, I mean, even nowadays, it is not very rare to see this type of marriages and this type of relationships. And listen, part of, for me, what the film says is that these characters, I don't want to think of them neither as victims or victimaries, because again, this is more complex and it's a very gray area. It's not black and white, but they are a product of this time and this way society is confirmed and that specific society. And I believe that Ignacio wants something, Amada wants something, and who both are gets in the way of getting what they want. And of course, this generates anger, this generates frustration, and eventually hate. They end up hating one another, but they are trapped. They are trapped in a marriage. They are trapped in this house that is their jail, and they cannot escape because even though divorce was legal back then in Mexico, it was unthinkable for these, you know, high society people, for this social class. So they were trapped. And for me, what was important to say is, in the end, this social, this way this society is conformed and structured ends up making both of them prisoners, and they are not able to escape. And for me, this is the biggest tragedy. None of them can either get what they want or be who they really are. So this is why we show this violence, to contrast how the reality of their lives is against what they, you know, are trying at least to show outside of their reality.
I think that's a great step to our following question, just because of the violent scenes, but also there is a lot of fear that you can feel through the characters, and that Laura and I wanted to ask you about a specific scene when they are in the club, Evaristo and Ignacio, and there, I think one of the characters approaches them and asks them like, and tells them, cuando actúan como hombre y mujer, esto ya no funciona. When you act like a woman and man marriage, this no longer works. Yeah. And so this made us think about how homophobia is not exactly about sex or people caring who you sleep with, but much more about disrupting socio-political and compulsive heteronormativity. We wanted to ask you, why was this piece of dialogue included in the film, and what was the intention of directing the audience towards this line of thought?
Your questions are great. I love your questions. And thank you for this, because this is a very important dialogue for me. Wow. So listen, it's interesting. Listen, I talked to most of my actors of the 41, which I have to say, you know, in parentheses, that it was beautiful to work with this man, and they became great allies and great friends, and the group that we formed, I mean, it was very special. It was very beautiful to see. It was very beautiful to connect with such different men, with so many types of, you know, masculinities or ways to be homosexual, and that was beautiful. That was beautiful. The group of men that was created, it's beautiful. And you know, most of them, even the oldest ones, some of the oldest ones are 60-something years old, 70-something years old. So they lived a completely different lives from the ones who are gay now in their 20s. And they lived a completely different Mexico. And I mean, all of them who are 60, 70 years old were married when they were young. They divorced, but they lived a very different type of life. And it's mostly these older gay men who told me, you know, I can imagine how many of these men back then, this is again, early 20th century, if they wanted to, they would have preferred not to be gay, just because of what it meant, just because of how difficult it was, just because they had to hide each other. And we all know how it was back then. And so there is a shame in many of them. And, you know, for me, it's very interesting, having said this, how sexuality can also be expressed, sexuality and love. So for me, one of the premises is that, you know, Ignacio is used to having sexual encounters. The biggest transgression that he makes is, in a way, is wanting to have a relationship with someone, not just a sexual encounter. So this is why this character says what he says in the film, because in a way they feel, or some of these men feel, that love relationship is not allowed, is forbidden. One, because they cannot live this freely, because they have to hide, because they have to live secretly, but also because, and for me this was fascinating to reflect on, is the fact that, well, we cannot have this model, you know, that is given to heterosexual couples, so we will reject it. We don't want this. We don't want this heterosexual way of living. And this is also something very common that, you know, older men feel like. Nowadays, you know, gay men can be free to either have this type of monogamous relationship, like it was the model back then with men and women. They can be free to live, you know, their love relationships or sexuality however they want. Back then, it was not an option. So, you know, it's very clear to me that there is also a rejection of, well, we cannot have this, then we don't want it. It's not for us. So that's basically what this dialogue is all about. For me, it encapsulates everything that I've said. This line: you're gonna behave like men and women, man and a woman.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that also something that como que I think we have another question, but I remember something I wanted to ask you. So Ignacio was part of this club when he got his promotion and when he married Amada. It was surprising to see that no one told him like, hey, you need to be chill now, or like you need to be more careful because you're much more in the public eye. And I think that what you spoke about his privilege also says about this entitlement or this carelessness of like, oh, things will work out anyways, or that even though they knew how precarious their situation was because they were men of power, because they were white, because they como que that sort of like righteousness y como entitlement came through with the fact that no one told him like even when they're walking out of the club and they're drunk and singing, they are screaming each other's names, and it was like, why is no one telling them to shut up? So I wanted to ask you about that, but not including like the hushness of the club, or like if it was also part of that entitlement.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, they believe that they were protected because of this position that Ignacio had in power, how close he was to the president of Mexico, who was not just any president. He was, he's considered to be a dictator. This was a man who was in power for 30-something years. So yeah, there was, I think that Ignacio believed that he was untouchable. And we still see very similar stories nowadays in politics, like what we saw 100 years ago. And it's very interesting that still in politics, homosexuality is very much a secret, even nowadays, you know. We, at least in Mexico, we don't have any politician that goes out publicly speaking about his life.
And so again, I think we wanted to speak about also the role of femininity in the film, because we see it in the plays and theaters and sort of like the burlesque that the club puts on, that is both, and it's never like poking fun at femininity or at women, but it's very much still cis men dressing as women. And then how I remember there was one scene that Ignacio is introducing Evaristo to everyone, and there was a tone of disdain when mentioning someone like, oh, and this is Fulano, and he likes to dress like a woman, blah, blah. There is a tone of disdain in Ignacio, and also the way he treats Amada, which might be also intertwined with racism. And so, but then we notice at the end of the film that Ignacio is putting on a dress, earrings, a necklace, and putting makeup on, which for me arrived at a point where I could not care about Ignacio anymore. I do have very strong negative inclining feelings towards him, because he was also a bad person. Obviously strategically to some people, but what was the decision to make Ignacio wear a dress and makeup and earrings in el baile de los 41?
Well, I mean, like you said, Ignacio, you know, plays this role. He plays the archetype of how man is supposed to be from that era. So he's masculine, he's married. And for me, you know, the most there is a metaphor in all of this, of course, and I think that for me, this moment that you talk about in the film, when he dresses up as a woman and he puts makeup and puts his earrings on, there is a very different energy from him in this specific moment from the rest of the film. It's a very different energy, and there is a very different facet or aspect of Ignacio at this moment. And you know, for me, it has a lot to do about how it is condemned in this society, or in that specific society that portrays the film. It is condemned for the masculinity to have femininity. So this is, you know, also one of the biggest transgressions for Ignacio, that he is not only discovered in this party with gay men, but dressed as a woman. And so, in a way, for me, it says a lot about how this has been punished for so long, for the, you know, a man to discover this feminine part about himself, and this is punished. So this is what it is about. For me, there is a big metaphor in this also. And for me, also, that scene, again, discovers, it's one of the few moments, like you said, and I can understand that, you know, people can hate Ignacio. I completely understand that. But at least it's one of the moments in which I feel that there can be certain sympathy with this character. I think that there is something very special about that moment, and how he allows himself to be vulnerable. There's a lot of vulnerability in this scene, which we don't see very often in this character. So, I mean, for many ways, I think that for me, this is one of the most special scenes in the film.
Muchas gracias, David. I wanted to take this moment to, before we make our next question, to invite the audience to submit their questions. There is a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. There you can submit your questions so that we can read them and share them with David, since we have his presence right here with us today. While we wait for questions to come from the audience, we wanted to ask you one of our questions. So in this film series, we included your work because it is an important contribution to our collective memory of queer history in Mexico and in broader Latin America as well. And we wanted, since you are already inside this landscape of work, we wanted to ask you, how do you see your work in dialogue with the current queer cinema landscape outside? How do you see your work in dialogue?
What a difficult question. I mean, maybe I will answer it in a much more simple way, but I think that, you know, first of all, history in Mexico is very rarely seen in film, in general history. And of course, LGBTQ history is much more rare. And for me, it was important to not only talk about the past, because I mean, it's obviously in conversation with the present, and many things of what we live now. Everything that we live now basically is a consequence of this past, and it's important to go to the past to understand. But also, I thought that I wanted to see a film like this. I wanted to see a film that told a story like this, but that could also, you know, be shown in cinemas everywhere in Mexico. I wanted to be a film that would not be specifically stay in the niche of art house cinema. I wanted to make a film that would have a broader audience, you know, that would be seen in anywhere in Mexico. So this was my goal, because I haven't seen a film like this, and I wanted to see a film like this, and I thought it was important to see a film like this. And I'm very proud that, I mean, it was difficult because the film premiered during the pandemic here in Mexico. So of course we had cinemas back then to our 30% capacity. But for me, it was important that the film was shown. The film was in most cities of Mexico, and that for me made an impact, you know, more than, you know, what people may think about the film. That in itself, for me, it was an impact. And to have in Mexico, I mean, Mexico City is an oasis, but the country, it's very harsh to still to be gay in most of Mexico. So to have certain parts of Mexico and have this image of men dressed as women, or have two men holding each other, that wasn't, you know, it was an act. And I mean, I saw how people were still pissed about. And so I said, that's why I wanted to make a film that would be seen anywhere in Mexico. And of course, fortunately, when it premiered on Netflix, the impact was bigger. And what I would like to, for if there is something that the film can make, is that there are more films like this that can be made, and it's not going to be as hard to make them like it was for me, basically. I don't know if I answered, but.
No, yeah, no, I think you did. And it's also, I think that the presence of queerness in cinema as a central narrative is also relatively new, because it was always present, but in very, sorry, there was a car. As a trope or jokes, yeah. Or especially with trans women, it was basically, the presence was basically comic, but not with like political weight or advocacy. I had a question and I completely blanked. I'm sorry.
No, can I add something from what you said? This is, I mean, another part, a very important reason for me for making this film is because I saw how queerness was portrayed in Mexican cinema, and I felt that most of the times, or most of the times, 90% of the times, it was a caricature, and it was not only a caricature, but there was some mockery about the way it's portrayed, and I felt there was no the word is respect, and there's no, that it's a caricature. So I dislike very much how, at least in Mexico, you know, the otherness is portrayed on film. So I knew that I wanted to portray masculinities, and portray different types of masculinities, and portray, because for me, also the 41 is this group, what it represents is this freedom, is this space of freedom, this space where you can be. And for me, it was important to show relationships within men, not only, you know, love relationships or sexual relationships, but all type of relationship, and that also was important. There are things that, again, that I wanted to see that I had very rarely seen in Mexican cinema, or if I've seen it, it was from an angle that I disliked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have two questions from the audience for you, David. The first question from, I guess, Gutierrez is, do you think the movie will make people rethink history and the heteronormative way it's been told, erasing episodes such as the Baile de los 41?
Sorry, rethink history and what?
Do you think the movie will make people rethink history and the heteronormative way it's been told?
Well, I think that the film at least puts a mark on that. At least the film if it generates a conversation. I mean, I believe that this is what art can make. I don't believe that art changes the world, but I do think that art can make you reflect. I do believe that art can generate discussions, and I think that this film, first of all, again, it reached a broader audience, which for me was very important. And I think that, you know, all different types of audiences reflected upon the place where they are at. So again, this film will be in conversation with subsequent films, and it's I see it like each work is just a step forward, or is something that, you know, makes the conversation deeper. Yeah.
We have another question from Alex Megaro from the audience, and it says, "Hello, David, your friend Alex in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Has anyone in the government or from a seat of power in Mexico seen the film and publicly commented on it?"
Alex, thank you for being here. He's a very good friend of mine. I'm very happy. I knew that he was going to write something. Thank you, Alex. You know, it's interesting because the current government that we have right now in Mexico is very much opposed to this era, because this is an era considered to be the era of you know, wealthy people, and you know, the revolution happened because of this president that was in power when the dance of the 41 occurred. So in a way, there is this disapproval of the whole Porfiriato. So, I mean, it was talked about, you know, people in politics posted things about the film, but not the ones that Alex is talking about. I think that the film mostly, again, and this is something that I'm very happy about, is that the fact that, you know, a broader audience, a general audience, was able to see the film, which for me was the most important, to have a conversation because I knew that in Mexico City, people would see the film. But I wanted this to be seen anywhere in many different places of Mexico. But yeah, there is in the current government like this disapproval of this whole era. They don't want to talk about it so much for what it means historically.
Thank you, David. We no longer have, or if you have as an audience one last minute question, you can submit it right now because we only have 5 minutes left. And in this time, we wanted to ask you, David, about, since you're talking about sort of political agendas and its political, the art or movies in this sense, political impact. Laura and I, as we mentioned at the beginning, curated this series thinking about queer futures, about how the future that we as a queer community can imagine depends on our ability to have time of thought, availability of privilege, our platforms of power, and our future depends a lot on imagination, how we conceive it in the future. So this is sort of like the line of thought that put over to question about our queer futures. How are we conceiving queerness in the future? And if we are there yet in a queer future that we wanted. And then for this film, we're evidently in a much better present than the movie was on, than the characters and the people and its histories and their histories were on. So we wanted to ask you about how do you reconcile with these implications of history being in the past, and how you think or imagine of queerness in the future, and how this movie can teach us as a community something.
Well, I mean, the first thing I will say is that, again, this For me, one of the most surprising things was to see that this film could have happened even today, 2022, in that specific circle of power. It would be very much similar to what happened back then. For me, the biggest impact was to realize how, of course, things have changed. Things are very different. But in this specific circle of power, it's not. People behave exactly the same. I mean, it's not forced marriages like that, like it was back then, but it's still, rich family marries another rich family, and they don't basically, there is an agenda as well. Still, homosexuality is very much a taboo in politics. So I felt that this film resonates a lot with what Mexico is today. This specific circle that is portrayed in the film, racism is still the same, misogyny, sorry, machismo is still the same. So everything's still rooted. I love this question, are we there yet? Because of course not. And okay, I will not say what I was going to say. I don't know if we'll ever be there yet. There's so much work to be done still. Doesn't mean things have not changed, but there is a reason for which I felt it was important to tell these stories, and there is a reason for which we still need to put these stories out there. And I believe very strongly they have to be seen and for a broader audience. I don't like, at least when I make films, I always, again, try to make it for any type of audience. They can dislike the film or like it, but I want my films to be understood by everyone.
Sorry.
No, please.
One more question that we can fit in. It's really good, so I wanted to bring it in before we go, from Hector Vargas. Nowadays, the art of drag is considered as an inspiration, trying to convey the beauty and power of femininity. However, in the film, the act of dressing as a woman is considered a vulnerability. Like you just said, when Ignacio is getting dressed for the danceo, do you think it could have been possible that even back then, men dressed as women because they also wanted to feel this power?
Yes, of course. And for me, there is a very specific scene about that, which is when these men are doing this show they're watching this show of the magic flute, and we see two men in drag. For me, it's that power. For me, it's that freedom. For me, it's a very different type of interpretation of the female figure. Absolutely.
So I think time's up. It's been 1 hour, and I feel really honored and grateful to having this conversation with you, David. It's been a pleasure, and I just wanted to give you the floor in case you want to say something just before we depart.
I mean, it went by so fast. I didn't feel the hour. I think we could still be talking so much more about this, and I hope we have a second chance to talk about something else in the future or another work. I do plan to make like a continuation of this story. I don't want to tell Ignacio's story and Zapata's story, which that will be a huge controversy. And this is why I'm so excited to tell this story, because it's touching upon, a taboo. How can this, macho hero, Mexican hero of the revolution have had a relationship with a man? So for me, this is fascinating, and there's so much to say about these characters and this situation. But anyway, I hope we can talk about this in the future.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, and really great questions, really good questions.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone else for being here today, Marcela, and the attendees. Thank you to each one of you as well. Do Do you want the floor, Marcela?
Just the closing, since this is the last event of the series for this semester. Thank you so much, Adri and Laura, for all you did for the series, and thank you for being here. I just put again the information, oops. Oh. I'll put the YouTube link so you can have all the information about this talk today and all the talks in this series. Thank you.
Thank you.